it took several months to try and figure out what was going on, but I
Okay.
ultimately think it was just the combination of training at a high intensity
hmm
and eating no carbohydrates at all. So,
What's up, everyone? This is your host Maurice from Carnivore Diet app, and on today's episode, I have my good friend Cassie Wild. Cassie is a mom and nutritional therapy practitioner and Weston A. Price chapter leader. She advocates utilizing food as medicine and has overcome her own battles through the power of nutrition. She has been on a low carb lifter for over 4 years, ultimately creating her own intuitive style of training, always striving to optimize her health and most been experimenting with the carnivore diet for the past 10 months. She hopes that by sharing her enthusiasm for challenging mainstream dietary and fitness principles, it will inspire others to challenge their own perceptions of health and fitness. Hey Cassie, good morning.
hello. So great to finally get to chat with you.
Likewise, looking forward to our conversation here, and we have a lot of audience actually looking forward to this meeting.
Awesome. I'm excited to get going on it then.
Great. So we're gonna start off right away here with some of the questions. So tell us a bit about your carnivore experience and how long have you been eating that way?
Yeah, so I started doing the carnivore diet back in March. So it's been about 10 months or so now. So I started doing it because I had some skin issues that weren't resolving with anything else I was trying. So I had tried changing, I mean, pretty much everything else in my diet. I had already
Okay.
cut out gluten and grains and sugar for quite some time. So there were a lot of things that I was very stumped on. I didn't understand why I continued to have cystic acne or my scalp just continued to itch. I've, switched my shampoos and all sorts of stuff. I don't use a lot of chemicals. So I was really stumped. So I just kind of ended up going to the carnivore diet, hoping that, maybe there's something internally still going on where I need to just kind of do the ultimate elimination diet and see if that'll help. And my boyfriend had been doing it for quite some time and he wasn't dead yet. So
Oh wow.
I figured
Okay.
I wasn't too afraid that, it was going to affect me too negatively. I was
Mm-hmm.
also already eating a lot of meat and just only a few vegetables. So the things that I was choosing, aside from the animal products, were what I understand now more high oxalate foods. So
For
I think I
sure.
was
Yes.
having, yeah, so I think I was having more issues with an oxalate toxicity or just an overload of the oxalates in my system. So I think that was contributing a lot to my skin. And I do know now that I am sensitive to eggs and dairy. Coconut seems to aggravate my skin as well.
Okay.
But yeah, but I mean, I noticed within about 2 weeks, I noticed pretty significant results with my skin clearing up. And aside from that, I felt great. My
Mm-hmm.
moods were great and my sleep was great, but I was having some issues with after the first month, I realized it kind of threw off my cycle. And so I was thinking, are my hormones all messed up or what is this doing to me? And it took several months to try and figure out what was going on, but I
Okay.
ultimately think it was just the combination of training at a high intensity
Mm-hmm.
and eating no carbohydrates at all. So I did incorporate carbs again and I tried experimenting with carbs before my workouts, but what it really came down to was I just really needed to lay off training the way I was and training as hard as I was. And once I stopped that and kind of reduced those stressors, I have just been on a much better path with eating carnivore.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, so then I do kind of go back and forth with trying to incorporate new things and in small amounts I've been able to tolerate things that I couldn't in the past, but there are still things if I have too much coconut oil or even raw dairy, there's things that still irritate my skin. So I know, what those I might not ever be able to eat them again, or I'm just gonna have to give it more time until I can try and incorporate them again.
Oh no, kidding. It's funny how it is because the moment we start doing the elimination diet and we try to introduce certain foods back to the diet, you'll know exactly which one causes a digestive issue, which one actually causes an allergy reaction. And it's funny how it is. We never seen that before when we used to just consume everything because we weren't as tuned with our bodies as we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, for a while too, I wasn't thinking about spices being
Hmm.
something that could be aggravating me, but I know now that pepper is one thing that I cannot eat. And I used to put pepper on everything, and
Oh
I
wow,
never
okay.
thought that could possibly be an issue. So it's really kind of interesting. Even with salt, sometimes I've definitely overdone it on salt. I think
Hmm.
for a while people convinced me you can't overdo the salt, but I think you absolutely can't even overdo salt. So it's kind of just been one experiment after another, and I mean, it takes time too, just to let your body
Hmm.
adjust and adapt to what you're doing. And then, if you're going to try something new, it might take a few days before you go back to your baseline to be able to reintroduce something.
Oh,
So,
oh, for sure. Everything takes time because it's almost like a trial and error. We're actually,
mhm.
we're figuring out things as we go. For example, I get a lot of audience asking me about salt because I haven't consumed salt for 11 months now. And they're
Oh,
like,
wow.
I'm like, don't you crave it? Don't you feel cramps or anything? I'm like, nothing. Everything is completely balanced. So what's the point of adding it as well? And it's funny how there's so many certain small things that we never thought about. We start to eliminate slowly.
Yeah, and I know we had talked previously about the salt thing.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot that you weren't doing the salt. So, if you want to update me on that now or another time, I'd really like to know more about how that's going without the salt.
Yeah, definitely. We can have another conversation because I've done quite a bit of testing on assault back and forth, especially with cramping, because a lot of the influencers and a lot of bodybuilders they said salt is very very important to actually have your proper electrolytes, but the Himalayan salt just because it's a full mixture that you need to replenish, and the moment you end up having cramping, you want to increase the dosage. And it's funny, the more I increased, the more cramping I would get and the more
Oh,
fatigue I would get. But
wow.
we'll definitely talk a little bit more about it in the near future.
Yeah, I'm curious to know. I've had a couple other people tell me that they've had issues with too much salt.
Hmm.
What their too much is, I don't exactly know. But yeah, so I'm curious to talk more about that another time too.
Yeah, would be great. Now, moving on to our second question here. So, how do you compare your fitness level right now compared to prior of starting the carnivore lifestyle?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to compare just because I've changed the things that I'm doing. But
Okay.
if we look at my relative strength, my strength hasn't changed. But I also haven't been lifting as heavy as often.
Hmm.
Um, so just my programming for my I, I don't even I'm just more recreational to be honest. Like I'm not competing or anything right now, but it hasn't changed much at this point, but there was definitely an adaptation period
Okay.
where there was several weeks where when I first was transitioning, I was very weak, very fatigued. I mean, even trying to just go on the rower for 5 minutes, I would feel out of breath.
Hmm.
Um, and there was definitely a major adaptation period, even though I was still coming from a low carb approach and I
For
was
sure.
eating a lot of meat. So it wasn't really adapting to that. It was just adapting to not having those extra little things, like raw honey or just those little bit of carbohydrates can make a big difference when you're training at a higher intensity. So at this point now, not much different, but there was definitely a good chunk, maybe, 5 or 6 months, if not a little longer, where I kind of wondered, is this just kind of my new normal?
Hmm.
Have I lost strength? And there's a lot of men that I've connected with too who've talked about, their powerlifting or bodybuilding, and a lot of them say, "Oh, I'm so much stronger." And then I always go back to, well, are men and women a little bit different in that sense too? So, yeah, it's taken some time, but things
Okay.
are definitely, I feel strong when I'm lifting. I feel like I have the energy when I'm lifting, and at this point, not much of a difference from when I was eating some carbohydrates.
No, that is really awesome because I'm actually comparing it to how I was years ago compared to right now being full carnivore coming to 2 years and now more than coming up to a year being raw carnivore and my strength and energy I compare it to when I was 20 years old compared to right now 20 years later was
Sure.
doing carb loadings and a lot of vegetables and stuff, and right now just strictly meat, and of course the ratio of the fat to protein being at least 2 to 1. that
Okay.
dramatically changed how I lift, how I act, how I feel overall, energy wise. So I'm probably, you're probably seeing the same result as well too, possibly.
Yeah, so you're doing more of a higher fat approach then, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, and that's when I noticed that things really started to turn around for me was when one, I stopped using some of the more processed fats. Like I don't do well with tallow. I don't do well with ghee. So I kind of had to experiment a lot with which fats I was using. Now I prefer, raw suet if I'm gonna do,
Yes.
fat from the beef. And I also like bone marrow. So those are kind of how I get my extra fats if I need it. But I've also just started eating fattier cuts and getting fattier ground meats. And then if I get fish, I usually choose a fattier fish as opposed to a leaner fish. So that was really when I started noticing improvements too, because when I first started out, I think I had way too much protein going on and not enough fat.
Okay. No, no, that's really good. It is interesting you said that, because so far there's roughly about a 33% of the population that they cannot handle processed fats such as butter and ghee and tallow or even duck fats. Because I was actually doing the same thing, and it's funny because I do a lot of blood work and my oxidized cholesterol was going up and spiking. But the moment I do like the natural suet or
Mhm.
the fatty cuts of beef, there's no oxidized cholesterol at all. So that kind of played a huge role. And it's funny how you mentioned that, actually.
Yeah.
Now, okay. Now, as a fitness athlete, what is your recommendation for muscle gain and weight loss for an average person who is just starting out?
Yeah, so I think those are going to be kind of two separate things that I would approach. So weight, well, in a way, right? So I
Okay.
think people who are trying to lose weight or gain muscle, strength training for both of those people is going to be beneficial because then the more muscle you're building, the more likely you're going to just start burning body fat naturally. So I would say just one, start strength training, right? Um, learn what you're doing. I know there's a lot of videos and things out there too, but even just learning, basic movement patterns, body weight movements, learning to do basic things like pull-ups, doing push-ups, doing, planking, just things
Okay.
that you really can start, learning how to engage your core if you do want to start lifting heavier. So I think for one, getting familiar with body weight movements, mastering that, having somebody, a friend or someone, a coach, help you make sure your form is good, make sure things are going well. But I think for the most part, body weight things people can start to figure out on their own if they're
Okay.
watching what they're doing. And so from a movement standpoint, I think that's absolutely essential. And then as far as diet, I think this is
Yes.
going to look a little different for everybody, but I think just kind of an all around, an all around idea for people is to just eat real food. Once people get away from things like the processed foods and all that, even just that's really, really going to help somebody lose the weight. The processed seed oils, the sugars, that's going to be probably step one for people who are just starting out from scratch.
Okay.
So I would say those, if anybody starts doing anything, it's one, eliminate processed oils and sugars. Walk a little bit more, spend more time outside and start doing more body weight movements. And that alone can really help somebody lose weight or start to gain muscle depending on where they're at. But I think if we're talking about really bulking up and really putting on size for somebody, they're usually a little bit, further ahead in the game and probably have already done basic strength training or
Okay.
basic body weight training or have at least maybe a general idea on nutritional guidelines.
No, no, for sure. So almost anybody who's just starting out there, doing body weight, like you mentioned, some of the compound training, like could be squats or chest as well too,
Okay.
push-ups, something basic, and of course, eliminating almost anything that is processed. I think that would be like the main step as a starter, which is really great point on there.
Yeah, I think that's really like when you're starting out super basic, I think that's a really easy, I mean, it's not easy, but it's a pretty straightforward place to start for people.
Okay, no, that is awesome. That's actually a great point there, and I'm sure a lot of the audience, this would be like their initial start. At least it gets them moving into the program, and from there, if they actually find themselves, hey, I feel great, I'm more motivated, I'm actually putting on some muscle, I want to take this one step further, then maybe they can possibly look in and hiring a coach possibly to actually assist them better.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think that's a great way to start.
Awesome. Now, can you share with the audience your daily intake of fat and protein, and if any supplements you use for your athletic levels?
Yeah, so I don't actually know because I don't ever track it, but I'll give people I'll explain what I eat, and if people ever want to calculate this out, they can figure it out.
All right.
But so I'll eat about a pound and a half of muscle meat a day.
Okay.
And I'm usually eating either a fattier ground beef, so
Okay.
maybe a pound of like 70/30 ground beef. And then I will eat usually a like half pound, three-quarter pound, sometimes a pound of steak, depending on how much of the ground meat I've eaten. And then I also will sometimes incorporate things like sardines or sometimes I'll get salmon. I don't eat a ton of fish, and it's hard to get good quality fish here.
For sure,
But if
yeah.
I do, then that's usually what I'll choose. And then sometimes I'll have a little bit of, usually just like a handful of beef suet that I've chopped up and frozen. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of liver, but I haven't been doing a lot of organ meats lately.
Okay.
Um, so at this point, I think it's probably about 70/30 is probably 70% fat and 30% protein, and about a pound and a half of muscle meat, sometimes a little extra bone marrow, bone broth, or suet or something. That's probably pretty general. Some
Okay.
days are going to be a little bit different, and on weekends or something, sometimes I'll eat pork rinds or more bacon or something like that. But when I first started out, there were days where I was eating about 3 pounds of meat. It was just absurd.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
that was when I was eating a lot more lean protein too.
Yes.
So since I've incorporated more of the fat, I'm not eating quite as much as large of a quantity.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that's about what I'm eating per day right now.
So just hopefully I didn't miss a part there. So when you say a pound and a half of muscle meat, is that including with the fat, or the fat's
Yeah,
totally separate?
yeah. That's including the fat,
Okay.
and like I said, so the cuts of steak that I'll eat are usually like a fattier sirloin or a New York
Okay.
strip or ribeye. And then as far as the what was I gonna say? Oh, the ground meat.
Hmm.
That's usually like a 70/30
70,
blend that
30.
I specifically asked the butcher for. I want it fattier, so then I know I'm getting more of the fat. So
Okay.
about a pound and a half of all that. And
Altogether.
I saw your questions before this, and I should have just calculated it, but
No, no,
I'm
no.
gonna give
It's no big
you
deal.
the
Just
hard
to kind of
answer.
give everybody an idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have calculated that out to know a little bit more, but that's about where I'm at.
Okay. Okay, no, that's awesome. Just because I'm trying to actually compare, because some of the questions we get, I still see actually till today a lot of audience are consuming like 3 pounds or 4 pounds of meat. I'm like, well, how much fat are you consuming? He's like, well, whatever the meat comes with. I'm like, are you asking for a fattier cut, or are you just trimming some fat on the outside, and that's about it? So this is really good that we're diving into it a lot more in depth, because I highly encourage everybody to be at least a 2-to-1 ratio at least, and
Mhm.
from there actually adjust accordingly based on your body and what you're looking to accomplish, and based on how much energy do you require that day, how much stress you're going through, and how much are you going to actually utilize.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, like I said, that's when I really started noticing improvements in my mood and my sleep when I was eating way too much lean protein,
Hmm.
lean ground beef, or sometimes I'd have venison or chicken. That's when I was realizing that I was actually like crabbier. I was
Okay.
just like kind of crabby and I was hungry. So that's when I realized, hey, it's probably because I'm not actually getting what I need from this.
For sure.
And then I also, yeah, I didn't answer your supplement question, but I don't take a lot of supplements. I do like ancestral supplements, and I
Okay.
like cycling. They're organ complex. And recently I've been taking the brain, and sometimes I'll do the bone marrow. So those are kind of my top three that
Okay.
I like to use from them. But otherwise, I don't use a lot of supplements.
Okay, that's awesome. No, that's good to know. Now, coming down to our last question here, what nutrition advice would you give to all women out there who would like to be in your physique and perform at a high level, and balance their time and their family as well too?
Yeah, so I think part of being able to kind of program accordingly and get the most out of your workout in a short amount of time. I think a lot of that does come from experience or just having somebody, following somebody's program that says, hey, this only takes 20 minutes.
For sure.
So I think for women, who have kind of gone through the same experiences I have with being trained, involved in something that was more structured and you had a coach and they kind of told you how to do things and you're in a place where you know that your movement patterns are good. I think, it's just one of those things where it depends on the person,
Okay.
but absolutely, I think incorporating a little bit of high intensity exercising throughout the week, not overdoing it like I've done plenty of times, but I think doing a little bit of, high intensity work, combining that with other disciplines, like maybe getting into powerlifting a little, doing
Okay.
those more compound movements as well, not being afraid to, to touch the barbell or learn how to squat or bench or deadlift. I think those are absolutely important as for women, especially if they want to put on muscle. That's not everyone's goal, but if that's what women want to do, that's going to be that's probably I don't know. I've never tried it any other way, but I think
Okay.
that's probably, a given. You're probably going to need to start lifting heavier. And just like, I think body weight movement is just so important because I think there's so many people out there, if you see people who are, deadlifting X amount, but they can't even do a pull up, and I'm thinking, hey, I think there's some things that should be coming first, but,
No, no, it
um,
is. Yes.
yeah, just kind of finding where you actually feel well training because there's been so many things too that I've tried and I think it's going to be great and I think I'm going to get a crazy pump or like it just sounds like it's going to be a great workout and it's not. And that's okay. You learn from that and say, "Hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do something that has way more reps at a lighter weight or however you feel." And that's where it's hard to tell somebody how to be intuitive, but I think for women and especially men as well, but the more intuitive people can become with their training and start focusing on the things that they actually enjoy doing,
Yes, of
I think
course.
that's when people are going to start to excel, and
Okay.
then it doesn't seem like a chore, and you can just keep it fun and fresh.
So it's all about kind of keeping it fun and fresh, like you said in the last point there. Now, what about how would you balance it with your current family? Like I know you have your kids as well, and I know a lot of audience out there they have their family, but
Hmm.
they want to actually take that that time to actually still exercise or manage their time properly. So how can you what how would you tell the audience how they can actually do that balance and still have that that physique they want, that shape they want?
Yeah, and I think like again, that's gonna just depend. We personally invested in some of our own equipment to be able to
Hmm.
work out at home. If my kid's running around, I can just go outside and work out on my own. Or even just doing workouts, if my kid's chilling, eating food, whatever, and you have 15 minutes,
Yeah.
just get in a quick workout, do a bunch of push-ups, do 10 push-ups every 30 seconds or something, do, do,
Okay.
do 5 rounds of that, or whatever the case might be. Some days are going to be a little different, but actually doing things, doing these workouts when you have the time and not just putting them off. I think we all get in those in those routines where it's like, everything's so structured, but if you just make it part of your routine and you don't let anything fall in the way, if you have to bring your kid, to do whatever with you wherever, hopefully you can join a gym